Welcome to American Catechism, episode number 29, for a movie review, number 7. Coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas, on this Wednesday, October 15th, 2025, where it is currently 85 degrees, a beautiful fall day. We are still celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States Navy, even though I am an Army veteran. Yesterday, I reviewed just a little bit of the history of the Navy, and we also reviewed this whiskey, Old Line American Single Malt, coming out of Baltimore, owned by a couple of Navy vets, Aviators. Today we'll look at this movie that deals with the Navy in World War II while sipping on some more Old Line whiskey. Just the facts. In Harm's Way is a historical, romantic war movie from 1965, produced and directed by Otto Preminger, based on a novel, Harm's Way, by James Bassett from 1962. This movie stars John Wayne, Kirk Douglas, Burgess Meredith, Patricia Neal, Carol O'Connor, and with a few cameos by Henry Fonda, George Kennedy, and Larry Hagman. Screenplay by Wendell Mays and music by Jerry Goldsmith. 165 minutes long. This is a black and white movie. The box office take was only $4.5 million, but it was nominated for 2 Oscars and won. The plot. While the movie does portray a portion of the stories of Pearl Harbor and the early campaigns in the South Pacific, Solomon Islands and area, the plot is much more about the personal lives of Captain and then Admiral Rock Torrey and his second-in-command, Commander Paul Eddington. Also, Torrey's son, Lieutenant J.G. Jerry Torrey, and the women in their lives. So we're talking about failed marriages, affairs, and bittersweet realities of wartime romances. I gave this movie a score of 76, and a letter grade for importance and enjoyability, a B-. My recommendation, for such an all-star cast like this, I think the subject matter, the plot, the script, special effects were all inadequate. This was an epic movie without the epic. Add to this, the weak special effects, and the movie just got a B grade from me. I mean, that's all this is. I cannot recommend it except to those die-hard John Wayne fans who would like to see John Wayne working with Kirk Douglas while Wayne was seriously ill with cancer and didn't know it yet. Historical accuracy. The movie is built around the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, and the early campaigns in the South Pacific in 42 to 43. While they used some real island names from the South Pacific, they didn't seem to use the actual names of specific islands that were involved in the battles, nor did they use real admirals' names or the names of specific ships from the battle. The movie then was built generally on the history of the war, but was not the story of any particular battle, campaign, or leader. This movie was made in the mid-60s, so even though they had a lot of cooperation from the U.S. Navy and the Marines, there was only a couple of ships used in the movie that were actually World War II era ships. That would be the USS St. Paul heavy cruiser and the USS Philip, a destroyer. These ships were the focus of the filming because they did not look like they had been modernized, and so they were passable as World War II ships. But other Navy vessels were also used in the filming, including the cruiser USS Boston. And although only the forward part of the ship could be shown because of the missile launchers in the back. Destroyers USS Brain, the O'Bannon, the Renshaw, the Walker, submarine Capitaine, and attack transport USS Renville. All the destroyers had to have their modern anti-submarine warfare gear, missiles and stuff, covered over with fake gun mounts or deck houses. Additional smaller vessels were provided in support, as well as an airplane, the HU-16 Albatross amphibious aircraft, painted in World War II markings, though that aircraft did not enter the U.S. military inventory until 1949, well after the war. So it was like a substitute for the PBY Catalina, of which there were no flyable examples available when the film was made. At the start of the movie, there's this scene in a nightclub or officers club, and the clothing and hairstyles of the women was from the 60s and not the early 40s. The historical accuracy then was not stellar, but again, the movie was more about personal relationships, not really the actual war. So for history, 15 out of 20 points. Production background. The movie had extensive help from the Navy and the Marine Corps, which I've already stated. So that does help with the production. It helps with the historical background, set and scenery, all that stuff. So a lot of help from the military, so kudos to them. This was the last major black and white movie with an all-star cast from Hollywood. 1965. So everything had been switching to color for some time, but this one they did make in black and white. And I appreciate black and white movies. I grew up in that era, and so the movie being in black and white didn't faze me in the least. I appreciate those kinds of, there's a different feel that comes from being black and white, and I like that in a movie. And so despite it being black and white, Loyal Griggs was nominated for an Oscar for Best Cinematography. The use of Coast Watcher Clayton Canfield, played by Stanley Holloway, was because of the movie PT-109 about President Kennedy. And that made Coast Watchers famous, and there was a couple other movies that included Coast Watchers. They were, so John Wayne was also, as I mentioned, seriously ill during this production. So some people think that lowered his performance in the production. After making this movie, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and had a lung removed along with some ribs. So, that was just like a month later. So it was really somewhat ironic that he got wounded in the movie, lost a leg in the movie in a battle scene. Now, I could not find any clue as to production costs, what the budget was, or length of time. So 3 out of 5 points for production background. Set, scenery, and wardrobe. The uniforms did look reasonably accurate, but there were some battle scenes where the actors should have been wearing combat uniforms, helmets and life jackets, but they weren't. And then again, that opening scene in the nightclub was much more reminiscent of the 1960s than it was of the 40s. Hairstyles, clothing, everything. So overall, the set and scenery was okay. It was decent, but it wasn't great. So 8 out of 10 for set, scenery, and wardrobe. Music. The music by Jerry Goldsmith was okay. It was not memorable to me, but some have called it notable. I unfortunately watched this movie without my wife. She's the musician in the family, so that hindered me somewhat in evaluating the music. 12 out of 15 points for music. Story and plot. The story was not so much about the war itself as it was about the personal lives of Captain Torrey and his XO, Commander Eddington. Military life is in fact hard on families, marriages, and during wartime romances. So let's make a movie about it, right? That seems to be the idea. The opening scene was really all about adultery and a tragic accident occurring while Pearl Harbor was under attack, perhaps saying that the war itself is a tragedy that brings out the worst in people. The story then goes on to show Captain Torrey acting heroically, and yet he's punished, and that's how the military works. You do the right thing, you get punished. But then he's later redeemed due to the necessities of war, and then the movie focuses, though, on the great personal tragedies of Torrey and his son, and his son's fiancée, Commander Eddington, They all push all kinds of buttons for an emotional roller coaster throughout the movie, and which is fitting for the ups and downs of the war itself, I guess. The character development of young Lieutenant Junior Grade Torrey is a highlight in the movie plot, I think. It goes from an angry, snotty, hanger-on, a political guy. He's in the Navy, but he's very political, and he's attached to a political guy. But he leaves that and becomes a warrior who's proud of his father. And so that is clearly a bright spot in the movie. The largest plot fail, however, was kind of the climactic sequence of Commander Eddington's life. There, I don't want to get into a spoiler or anything, but he does something at the end that's just like, in real life, you really couldn't do that. I mean, that was a plot hole that was a mile wide. So, at any rate, that's the story and plot line. 15 out of 20 points. Acting, John Wayne and Kirk Douglas were two great actors from the golden age of Hollywood. I love them both. Yet somehow, this movie didn't bring out the best in either of them. Patricia Neal, she stole the show for me in a lot of ways. She plays a Navy nurse and is really the one who brings inner healing to Captain Torrey more than anything else. So to me, she was the star. Brandon DeWild, who played Captain Torrey's son, Jerry Torrey, Lieutenant Junior Grade, he also kind of stole the show for me in that there was a great transformation that happened with him, and there's a couple of tragedies involving him in his life, and maybe three total. Yeah, three different tragedies happened there. And so watching him really was also kind of a highlight in the movie. So for acting, 13 of 15, but it wasn't the headline actors who did that. It was Brandon DeWild and Patricia Neal. They're the ones who really carried the movie for me. So that's acting, 13 out of 15 points. Special effects. Well, the scene at the start, with the Japanese strafing this one couple on the beach, that was kind of stupid, really. It was. The Japanese simply didn't do things like that. They had a mission. They were focused on taking out the ships and the aircraft and the airfields and the maintenance facilities of Pearl Harbor and Hickam Field. And so they're not going to strafe a couple of people out of the beach. That's stupid. Now, many of the naval scenes were made using models that were simply inadequate for the task. I mean, when you watch those sequences, it's like, well, that's not a real ship. That's clearly a model. And so they were just not well done. The action sequences just weren't real well either. One comment that I saw came from Kirk Douglas, that he had complained about the special effects at the end of the making of the movie, and he wanted to personally fund a remake of some scenes using the special effects team that he had used 7 or 8 years before in Paths of Glory. Now, much of the film was made on board U.S. Navy vessels, so that was a plus. But overall, the special effects kind of suffered. So 7 out of 10. Bonus points. Knowing now that John Wayne made this movie while very ill with cancer, and he didn't know it. He got his diagnosis right after this movie was made, and then surgery a month later. So knowing that does add some merit to the movie if you're a Wayne fan like I am. So bonus points, 3 out of 5 for the bonus. This gives me a total score of 76. Letter grade for importance and enjoyability was a B-. My analysis and recommendation. For such an all-star cast, I think that the subject matter, the plot, the script were all inadequate. And special effects. It was an epic without being an epic, right? add to this again the weak special effects. It just gives it a B grade movie, B minus. So I can't really recommend it except to those die-hard John Wayne fans who would like to see Wayne working while seriously ill and didn't know it. So for that, it is praiseworthy, and it makes the movie worth it after all. Because I didn't know this going into this movie. I did not know how sick John Wayne was at this time. I mean, I knew he eventually was going to get cancer, but so like my review, my last movie review, A Gathering of Eagles for the Air Force birthday a month ago, this movie is all about the stress on personal relationships during military service. And with this movie, it's during wartime, whereas A Gathering of Eagles was during peacetime. And so that is worth making a movie over for sure. But this movie just really didn't do it for me. Too many gaps. It just didn't work. So I can't really recommend it unless, again, you're just a diehard John Wayne fan. In conclusion, I plan out these videos 3 months in advance, but when push comes to shove, my schedule depends a lot on my work schedule, which can sometimes throw me a curveball as it has the last couple of weeks. Family stuff, health stuff. The net effect is that, I missed out on a couple of shows that I wanted to do on Leif Erikson and the Battle of Tours, Paul Martel. And then this show today is a day late. The show I did yesterday for the birthday of the Navy, that was a day late. So, things like that happen. I will still announce videos that I'm planning on and working towards, but things just don't always work out. So like coming up next, I'm going to be going back to my blended Scotch reviews, and I've got a couple of blended Scotches here that I hope to do reviews of this week. We've got Duncan Taylor 5-star and Bell's blended Scotch. So hopefully I'll get reviews of these two Scotches out this week, later on this week. For now, this is American Catechism, out here.